Welcome to Obscure Epochs Revealed, the channel that brings history to life, from the battles of the Romans to the legends of the Vikings. Here we dive into myths, cultures, and forgotten stories, concise, thrilling, and full of facts. The hills of southern Czechoslovakia hold many old stories, but none quite like that of Dobruš Castle, and the man who refused to leave the Middle Ages behind. His name was Josef Mencik. To his neighbors, he was a curious sight, a figure in chainmail, riding through the countryside on horseback, waving to children as if he'd stepped out of a history book. He lived as though time itself had forgotten him. At Dobruš Castle, Mencik surrounded himself with relics of a vanished world. He wore plate armor polished to a dull silver shine. He kept swords, shields, and crossbows, not as museum pieces, but as tools of daily life. Electricity, cars, radios, he wanted none of them. In an age of modernity, he chose to live in defiance of it. The villagers called him the Knight of Strakonice. Some laughed, others admired him, but everyone agreed Josef Mencik was unlike anyone else. To understand Mencik, you have to understand his conviction. He wasn't just eccentric, he believed in something. He saw the 20th century as a betrayal of old virtues, honor, courage, integrity. Where once knights had fought for ideals, men now fought for profit and power. So Mencik made a choice. He would live as though chivalry had never died. He practiced swordsmanship in his courtyard, read medieval chronicles by candlelight, and opened his home to anyone seeking refuge or conversation. To the youth of his village, he was a living legend, a man who turned nostalgia into protest. But the world outside his stone walls was changing fast, and soon that world would come crashing to his gates. It was the autumn of 1938. Europe was holding its breath. Hitler's armies were preparing to occupy the Sudetenland, the German-speaking border regions of Czechoslovakia. As tanks rolled toward the countryside and artillery thundered in the distance, fear spread like wildfire. Most people fled. But one man, one knight, saddled his horse. Josef Mencik mounted his horse in full medieval armor, chainmail under his breastplate, a sword at his side, the steel gleaming beneath the gray sky. He rode down from Dobruš Castle, past the trembling villagers, toward the road where the German columns were advancing. Imagine that moment. Columns of tanks, engines growling, smoke rising. And in front of them, a lone rider from another age. Mencik raised his hand and called for them to stop. Witnesses say the German soldiers hesitated, unsure if what they saw was real. A knight on horseback, standing in their way. Of course, he had no chance of stopping the invasion, but that was never the point. Josef Mencik's act was not one of madness, but of meaning. He stood as a living question to the modern world. What had we become? A single man in armor facing an army of machines. Steel against steel, but one forged for honor, the other for domination. He did not fight. He did not surrender. He simply stood, representing an ideal the world seemed to have forgotten. The soldiers, perhaps moved by the absurd nobility of the sight, spared him. They passed around him, and the tanks continued toward Prague. Mencik returned to his castle, his defiance silent, but eternal. Josef Mencik could not stop the occupation, but he left an impression that no tank could erase. To the people who saw him, he became a symbol, the last knight of Europe, a man who carried the torch of chivalry into the age of mechanized war. After the war, Dobruš Castle stood quiet again. Mencik lived out his final years surrounded by relics of the past, his armor hanging by the door, his horse grazing in the field below. When he died, he left behind more than just a legend. He left a question that still echoes today. In a world driven by technology and power, what place remains for honor? Josef Mencik's story reminds us that courage doesn't always win battles. Sometimes it simply refuses to surrender its soul. If this tale moved you, leave a like, subscribe for more Obscure Epochs Revealed, and tell me in the comments, would you have ridden out?